eat the foods and receive the necessary nutrition as a result. So I am grateful to be here. Also, this picture, how many of you in this room are in this photo from yesterday? Raise your hand. Thank you. We've had an amazing last 2 days over at the clinic. Does everybody recognize this building? Okay, good. You're good. If not, we may have a problem. So it's been a phenomenal first couple of days. We've been able to treat and surgically plan and place 44 implants that will help restore function to so many deserving patients here in the area of Hanoi. So I am from Zimby Dental. My name is Doug Brown, and I head up education for the Americas, and it is something that I absolutely love to be part of because of what I just mentioned. We have a direct impact in helping to train you, the doctors, on how to place implants, on the science and the parts and pieces and the armamentarium. And I love this audience of students who have their entire career ahead of them. So you're building, by being in this room today, you're building the foundation that will help change people's lives. It'll help restore their smiles. So today, what we're going to talk about is we've heard two phenomenal case presentation thus far. We've seen those smiles transform, and we've started to hear a bunch of different terminology, whether it's abutments or implants, thread patterns, the different types of abutments, screw-angled access channels, cement retain versus screw retain, all of these terms. We're going to take it a step back and we're going to go over some of the basics today when it comes to what the difference between those parts and pieces are and how to select them. So as you continue on in your journey, those terms, the more you hear them, the more you study them, will become second nature. So that when you hear world-class educators like Dr. Town and Dr. Kim, it'll immediately click, oh, that's exactly what they're referring to. So first, just a little bit about Zimby Dental. Zimby Dental is a global implant manufacturer serving the $8 billion tooth replacement market globally. So we operate in a phenomenal space. We work with a number of different subcategories, inclling implants, biomaterials, digital dentistry, workflows, and how to incorporate all of that into your practice. We're a global organization with distribution and training centers all throughout the globe, as you can see here on the map. A little bit of an overview when it comes to the different categories in which we go to business, and as a result, areas in which we help to educate. There are three primary categories. The first being dental implants and all the different parts and pieces and components that come along with that, as well as biomaterials. You cannot place an implant if there's not the biology in order to, and the space in order to be able to surgically execute. So to build that foundation through bone grafting materials and procedures, building that foundation ultimately allows us to surgically place and then restore an implant. And then digital dentistry. We've heard a lot about digital dentistry so far today, and we will continue to hear more and more over the course of this afternoon and tomorrow. But digital dentistry is changing the efficiency of how we are able to bring these treatments to the patient population. So I mentioned that we focus a lot on education. And what does that look like? There's a number of different ways that we have the opportunity to learn. One of them being in conferences and symposiums like this, in partnership with Vietnam National University and Operation Smile, faculty from world-class institutions like UPenn and NYU and Nova and Texas A&M. There's a lot of great representation in this room, a lot of experience. One of the things that I love about dentistry is the willingness for us to share our experiences with each other, because we learn from each other. We cannot learn it all on our own, so why not stand on the shoulders of those who have come before us in order to learn? The access to that kind of knowledge has never been more available than right here today. There is so much information at our fingertips. It's important for us to understand the correct sources to go and get that education and to get that information. A number of those different types of offerings or options that are out there are, like I mentioned, in this room. Also with men here as well, local representatives are a great resource. There's also field-based educational programs, university-based, clinical, over-the-shoulder, kind of like what we've been doing over in the clinic the last 2 days is a great example of that over-the-shoulder kind of mentorship, learning by observing. Okay. Also, webinars, the amount of information, the amount of education that is available online and on demand through the correct sources is unprecedented in the history of dentistry right now. So I mentioned web-based learning, and I want to just expand on this a little bit. Web-based learning can mean a number of different we can get the information through a number of different areas, including live webcasts. You know, many of the speakers that are here today will perform live virtual webcasts where we can tune in from anywhere in the world and hear a lecture and learn from that. Those live virtual programs can be documented and turned into on-demand type of resources as well. We also have installed camera and equipment into operatories of a number of clinicians throughout the world. One of them includes Dr. Jason Kim, where cameras are set up and we can document and follow along with live clinical cases and learn from people like him.
Ví dụ như là bác sĩ Jason Kim ở đây thì có thể là giảng trước camera hoặc là chúng ta có thể đeo camera để thực hiện những cái phẫu thuật trực tiếp.
All right, this has audio. Clicker, could you advance it one slide, please? Okay, so where can we find all of this kind of information when it comes to virtual programming? ZimV has created a free app that is a wonderful resource for you to be able to go in and view right now upwards of 200 presentations, clinical presentations, and you can go in and watch those, and on all kinds of different topics, from restorative to surgical to bone grafting to ridge augmentation to digital dentistry workflows, and the list goes on, and you can search those. And I believe we even have some that are translated into Vietnamese, so it's just a great resource for you as well. So just right up here on the screen, you'll see you can either search for it via the App Store or Google Play, or also via the QR code that we have up here. Okay, can you advance? Okay, so when it comes to education, another element of education is what are called ZIMV Institutes. ZIMV Institutes were built from the ground up in partnership with universities in the United States for opportunities for simulated patient care. We have a variety of them located throughout the world, including Carlsbad, California, Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, Winterthur, Switzerland, in Costa Rica, Colombia, as well as Chile. And then we will be building a new one in Tokyo, Japan here in the next couple of years. So these included a variety of different models that are based on actual patients. These patients were screened, and models were made based on the data that came back, information that came back from the patients themselves, and very realistic models in the form of a simulated patient scenario. The models include periosteum, soft tissue, cortical layer of bone, as well as cancellous layer of bone, and another just phenomenal education experience. Very realistic. Also, cadaver labs. Another element of learning implant education is in the form of cadaver labs. And the ZIMV Institutes have cadaver labs in which we source fresh frozen specimens, and we're able to use those, again, partnering with world-class education institutes, universities, and clinicians throughout the world. The educational footprint for ZIMV in the United States is a rich legacy of our history. Just like with partnering with Vietnam National University, by partnering with these universities, we're able to help educate the next generation of implantologists and surgeons and restorative doctors. And this is foundational to what we do at ZIMV. So here's just a small example of the university partners that we work with in the United States. And next assignment for me is to go home and start to make a map, a global map, so we can put VNU on the map as well. So we've heard a lot about the parts and pieces thus far in reference, and what I want to do now is talk about some of the foundational pieces that are instrumental in implant dentistry. And so we're not going to focus so much on brands or the features and benefits as much as what are the requirements? What is it that we need to look for when you're planning a case? So let's say you've had the data acquisition, you've taken a CBT scan, you've maybe taken just a pano, depending on the technology that's available in your particular area. And now it's a matter of treatment planning that particular implant case. And so what we want to think about there is the macro geometry of whatever implant system it is that you'll be using. And there's two main elements to think about when it comes to picking a size of implant. We have the length of the implant as also the diameter. And so how do we know which one to use? Well, that's where your clinical experience will come in. I believe Dr. Kim mentioned he's going to be talking a little bit more about that this afternoon. But by and large,
báo cáo buổi chiều nay của bác sĩ
a couple
Jason
basic
Kim sẽ nói kỹ
principles
hơn
is
về
that
cái vấn đề
we
này.
want to maintain enough bone around the implant
Đó là chúng ta
so
luôn
that
luôn phải làm sao
the
duy trì
bone
được
will
một cái
remain
tình trạng
healthy
xương
and
lành
strong,
mạnh
that there
ở
will
xung
be
quanh implant.
solid blood flow.
Chúng ta
But then
đảm
it's
bảo
also
được
going to
cái
be
nguồn máu
mechanically strong enough
cho xương
to
ở xung
handle
quanh
the
cái
biting
vùng implant này,
forces
cũng
that
như là
will ensue.
chúng ta đạt được cái độ ổn định về
And so here's an example of some of the
của
basic
cái bản thân cái
implant sizes,
Đây, chúng ta thấy là
anywhere
có
from
rất là nhiều
a
những cái lựa chọn implant khác
3.1
nhau.
millimeter implant
Chúng
with
ta
a
có
2.9
những
millimeter
cái
connection
implant,
going
3.1
in
đoạn được.
gradually wider diameters, including 3.7, 4.1, 4.7 millimeter, 5.4, and then all the way up to 6.0 millimeters,
rồi thậm chí là 5.0.
of which, of 44 implants that we placed the last 2 days, we did not place a single 6 millimeter. So it all depends on the population base that
Đó, và trong những cái ngày hôm
you're
trước chúng ta
serving.
thấy là
But
chưa từng phải thấy implant nào
in
6.0
addition to
đó
that,
thì
the
cái này
next
thì nó sẽ-
element
nó
is
sẽ liên quan
the
đến yếu tố
length
chủng
of
tộc,
the
tức là cái
implants.
tình
And
trạng
again,
xương,
that
xương là
is
xương của chúng ta
determined
thì
by
nó
your
không có đủ, nó không có
preclinical
lớn như
data
là người nước ngoài.
and treatment planning process. And those go from 8 millimeters all the way up to 16 millimeters in
Rồi thì chúng
various
ta, cái
increments
chiều cao
of.
của implant thì nó cũng dao động từ 8 cho đến
lengths.
16 mm.
It was mentioned that the apical stability upon placement
Và chúng
of
ta cũng biết
implant
rằng
insertion is critical.
là
It's critical
cái
to the
khả năng mà tạo
success,
được
the
ổn định cơ
long-term
học,
success
ổn định sơ khởi ở
of the
vùng chóp
implant.
của implant thì nó
And
rất
so
là
by
quan trọng.
having an aggressive thread pattern
Bằng cái cách mà
at the
chúng ta có những
apical
cái gen rất là
third is
sâu ở
very
vùng chóp.
critical in order to be able
Đây là một yếu tố rất là
to
quan trọng
have
để có thể
clinical
đạt được cái sự,
flexibility in how you're going to
để
further
chúng ta có
the
một cái
case.
khả năng thích ứng trong các cái tình trạng xương khác nhau. Và chúng
So
ta có
for
thể
example
đạt được
here,
cái
this was
ổn định
just
sơ
showing
khởi ở
a
vùng
study that was performed showing the initial stability because of the aggressive threads of
Đây
the
là
apical
một
third
cái biểu đồ nó cho chúng ta
of
thấy
the
là cái ổn
implant.
định
This
sơ
has
khởi
come
có
a
thể
long
đạt được.
ways when it comes to implant technology.
Nhờ
It
cái
used to
hệ
be
thống gen, đặc biệt là
20
hệ thống TSX.
20 years ago or so, the implant would be placed. We'd get pretty good primary stability, but what we would do typically would be at what's called a two-staged implant surgery. So we would put a cover screw on it, cover it up,
chúng ta vẫn có thể đặt
suture
implant
over the
với
top
cái
of
độ
it,
ổn định
let
sơ khởi
it
nhất định.
bake,
Tuy nhiên
let it
thì
cook
thời điểm
for a
đó
while,
chúng ta vẫn đi theo
come
cái
back
quy
a
trình
few
đó là
months
implant
later,
hay
expose the
chúng ta sẽ ủi
implant,
cái implant,
and
sau đó thì
then
chúng ta sau khoảng
ultimately
tầm
restore the
6
implant.
tháng chúng ta quay trở lại chúng
But
ta
with
bộc lộ cái
today's
implant.
technologies of much greater or aggressive thread patterns, we have a lot more flexibility, whether it's placing a provisional
thì chúng ta
at
hoàn
the
toàn
time of
có thể
surgery,
cho cái
which
implant
could
chụp
help
tức thì
with
ngay tại cái
aesthetics.
phẫu thuật.
It could also help with soft tissue management,
chúng ta có thể kết hợp với
and
những
ultimately
cái
just
phẫu thuật
get that much better of an outcome. We have a
để
lot
làm-
more
để cải thiện cái
flexibility
kết quả
now
sau cùng.
due to the advancements in the
Đó thì
macro
những
geometry
cái
of
thành
implants
tựu đó
today.
hoàn toàn đạt được là nhờ những cái sự thay đổi về
It also
cái-
allows us
cái
to
mặt
place
thiết kế cũng như là về mặt
implants
vật liệu.
in sockets or immediate extraction sites where maybe before you would have to kind of follow wherever that tooth came out of, wherever the extraction site was. And that led to more of a surgically driven
ở trong cái vùng mà
treatment
người ta mới
plan
nhổ.
or surgically driven, as Dr. Kim mentioned. Whereas now we can start with the end in mind. We can start with a prosthetically driven
Ngày nay thì
outcome,
chúng
which
ta luôn luôn
Dr.
phải
Lynn's
đặt
going to speak to us later
mà
this
theo
afternoon.
cái kế hoạch của mình.
Looking forward to that. But we can place the implant where it makes the most sense from the beginning because of the technologies that have been advanced over the last few years. I'll skip that one. So the way that an implant is designed, we have here at the what we refer to as the apical end of the implant. So this is the apical end. This is where we really need the primary stability when placing of an implant, because oftentimes, especially in an immediate extraction site, the bone to implant interface at the coronal aspect, so further up the implant, we may not even have bone contact. But that doesn't matter as long as we have strong apical stability at the time of insertion. And then you have the coronal aspect, or the part at the platform right at the very top. And this, we need to have flexibility here as well. Because when you place an implant, rarely is a ridge just perfectly flat.
nó cũng sẽ cần phải thích ứng
right?
được.
So we're
Nó
going to
sẽ
either
nó
have
sẽ
to place
giúp chúng ta là
the implant supracrestal
đôi khi
by
thì
quite
chúng
a
ta sẽ cần
ways.
phải đặt
Sometimes
những
there's
cái
clinical
tình huống cái
advantages to
implant nó
doing
có thể là
so.
cao hơn xương.
Maybe we need a little bit more runway for a nice emergence profile.
Rồi đôi khi chúng ta sẽ cần phải đặt
we
implant nó
just
sâu hơn một chút
need,
để chúng ta có cái dạng thoát phục hình tốt hơn.
we need the space. But when we do that, the bone is going to resort down to that level.
Thì chúng ta biết rằng
There's
là
also indications where maybe we place the implant right at the crest of the bone, or even supracrestal or above the bone. And in these instances, it used to be where implants would have a machine collar or a machine surface around the top of the implant, which was very nice for peri-implantitis. And it prevented bacterial growth on that type of surface quite a bit. But the trade-off to that is that the bone wouldn't adhere to that type of surface as much. And so you're always playing this balancing act when placing an implant. And so the technologies that are at the top of whatever implant system that you're using is very important to look at. So on the top of the TSX, I will mention this feature of the TSX implant is what's called a dual acid etched surface, which acts very similar to machine from a bacteria prevention element, while maintaining a roughened surface so that the bone can grow onto it. And so here you can see some scientific SEM images showing in the upper left machine titanium. The green element is bacteria growth. And again, this, visually speaking, is very smooth. So it's not going to, bacteria is not going to adhere to it nearly as much. And then the more roughened surface, you can see that the trade-off of that is, yeah, bone would grow really nicely against that type of material, but it's also going to harbor bacteria. And so if you have a situation where the implant is exposed slightly above the level of the bone, it's going to be difficult to clean. And then you're going to ultimately have to send the patient to the periodontist, like Dr. Kim, to get it clean. So you can see in the second image, the dual acid etch type of coronal part of the TSX implant acts very much like a machine collar.
Thì nó có cái lượng vi khuẩn nó bám lên cái bề mặt này thì nó chỉ tương tự như là cái implant có cổ láng mà thôi.
So I'm going to show this slide a couple times throughout the rest of the presentation. And it has to do with knowing where we want to end. And then choosing the type of technology that makes sense for you in your practice, or you in the university. Because we can get to the end, we can get to the smile a number of different ways. So as you're learning, it's important to understand a digital workflow so that you can choose what makes the most sense for you in your practice. And that starts with a scan. It starts with data acquisition from the patient, and then utilizing planning software in order to plan the case. And then from there, we then clinically choose whether or not to incorporate guided technology. And there's cases for it, there's cases where it may not make sense. And we'll go into some of those considerations to think about. Then there's the surgical placement of the implant. And like Dr. Kim mentioned earlier, sometimes the surgery itself might be, in all of this, the most straightforward part of the implant, of restoring the smile to the patient. It's using your brain, it's using the resources that are available, and knowing which ones to incorporate, which ones not to incorporate. It's that overall treatment planning process that is the most critical. And then from there, there's the healing process, the scanning, and ultimately the fabrication of the final prosthesis. So So 2 quick slides on just a surgical implant system. So how many of you here in the room have ever seen an implant surgery performed? Whether observed, whether it's online, or a video. Has anybody seen that? Okay, just a hand. Out of battery. I'm going to switch. So we talked about the different diameters of implants and the different lengths. So the surgical process, in order to do that, we go through a drilling sequence to gradually widen the osteotomy as well as create depth at the surgical site for us to be able to place the implant. So this here is a tapered screw vent surgical kit, and all different implant systems have a similar type of kit. So for our purposes today, it's for you to be able to see the process that would take place in order to drill your osteotomy and then place the implant. And the first part of that are these drills at the top. So these are drills that are designed to go in sequence depending on the size of implant that you're going to be placing. We're going to gradually go to depth to whatever length implant that you're going to be performing the surgery, whether it's 8 millimeters, 10 millimeters, 11.5, 13, or 16 millimeters. And then from there, go 1 drill at a time to widen that osteotomy. We do this by starting with a starting burr or pilot point. And the purpose here is just to create a small dimple or a small purchase point on the ridge of the bone, so that when you transition over to the rest of the drills, that you have a good starting point. And then from there, we follow the sequence. Again, each step of the way, verifying using parallel pins, which are... Oh, there they were. Parallel pins to check angulation. Because you want to verify each step of the way that your path of insertion is looking good. Because all along the way, we can make adjustments, small adjustments, and the case will continue to be executed well. But if we just go straight to full depth and straight to full width without checking and verifying along the way, then we may be to a point where there's no return. So we want to make sure that we verify every step of the way. And then ultimately, we will place the implant using a series of different drivers, depending on the clinical need, the space that's required for the particular case. And then the drills are, they have a depth gauge or depth line naming convention that's on the drill bit from 8, 10, 11.5, 13, and 16 millimeters. So we're drilling to depth, again, based on how much bone and the size of implant that was predetermined during the treatment planning process. Okay, now we're going to transition over to abutments. Now that the implant has been placed, there's a variety of different abutment options and comparisons that are out there. And the 2 main styles of abutments are screw retained and cement retained. We've heard these terms in the clinical cases earlier today. So what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of a screw retained versus a cement retained? Because there's advantages to both. Some advantages of cement retained, you have a lot of seating flexibility. Maybe the implant's placed and it's off angle. Using a cement retained restoration, you have some flexibility because you don't have to really necessarily manage that screw access hole. So it's good for angulation correction. It's also better for occlusal customization. But there are some disadvantages as well. Some of the disadvantages is lower retention. It becomes an issue with excess cement. And we're seeing this more and more as implants have been adopted as the standard of care in many countries across the world, we're starting to see more and more issues with periimplantitis from cement that wasn't cleaned out completely. And it also is a two-piece assembly. So what are some of the advantages of screw retained on the other hand? So over on this side of the screen, some of the advantages that it becomes a one-piece assembly, which makes it quite a bit more simple. It eliminates the need for cement.